Well, at least some of you.
Okay, Jake, you want to kick it off? I can do the roll call as soon as you're ready.
You bet, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our second meeting.
Yeah.
Somebody's on audio. Let's see. Is that better in the room?
Yes.
Okay. What we're going to do today is we are going to have Mike be our co-chair is going to chair this meeting since I am remote right now and on vacation in Idaho. But I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming, and I'm going to kick it over to you, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Jake. And we'll see you when we get back. Let's do a roll call. Of course, Jake is here this time. Marla, I see you're here. Doug Gibson, were you able to call in?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great. Arthur is here.
Yeah, I will have to leave for 5 minutes at 3 o'clock, but I will be here the rest of the meeting.
Okay. Grant is here. And of course, I'm here. Seth Gilchrist, are you in attendance? Okay. Eric Wilson? Yep. Let's see. Nathan Duvall? Good. Jacob Edwards? Thanks, Jake. And Catherine Thomas? Yep. Okay, good. So we've got, definitely have a quorum. Any modifications, additions to the agenda? I'm seeing none. Okay, is there any public comments? I'm seeing none there. So we go into executive reports. Jake, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to mention that we have still not got any applications for another alternate position. So if anybody has any names that you would like to throw forward, you can fill out their application form. I don't care.
Okay, and as far as from the co-chair, some perspectives for the balance of this year that I see, we need to get our authorities governance going and getting it in place. That's one of our committees. HNTB is putting together a draft set of policies for us to start with, but we need, and it's further down in the agenda, we need to get some chairs and co-chairs and so on, team members on that governance committee named and get you lined up to get going on it. Another one is legal counsel. We need to get that awarded, and I know we do have a team already in place for that with Arthur, Catherine, and who was the? Yeah, and Jake there. So that's great, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit later. We need to reach agreement with the Port of Hood River on an interagency agreement describing the services and support that we're going to get from them. Of course, we're going to pay for it and so on, but there's a draft being developed, but we'll need a team to take a look at that and get it ready to go. We need to finish our federal grant application, which is due in August. As we said earlier, this is our year. We're going to have a discussion on this a little bit later on, but I see a strong need not only to get the grant there, but involvement by our communication team to try and get overwhelming support from the communities on both sides and hit the Department of Transportation as well as our legislators at the same time when this thing comes in. And I think there's going to be a lot of work there to make that happen in time. We need to complete the progressive design build contract, or the RFP. It's progressing nicely, but we need to name, and we're going to talk about that today, name an evaluation team which is what we did with the RBMC contract last year. But we need to name that team and get them involved in the final review of the RP, so that team understands what's in the contract that they're evaluating to. So that needs to come together here pretty quick. We need to really support and continue and really support state and federal funding efforts. We did have some bad news last week. Some of us know this individual very well, Hal I'm going to get his name wrong. Hamstead? He's our lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I believe it was last Thursday night. He had an aneurysm and passed away, totally unannounced, unexpected. That's a real loss for us on so many different levels. I can tell you from a personal point of view, myself, Marla, Jake Anderson have spent a lot of time with this guy on our particular project. He's been extremely supportive of us, getting us into people that we needed to get into, and he provided some really good insight to us. So he's going to be missed greatly. What we're thinking about is we'll let that team at Summit basically have the week to kind of think about things. It's going to be a big change for their organization. Towards the end of the week, early next week, we'll contact them and try and figure out what's the plan going forward. We don't know whether they have enough senior talent that they could go ahead and move over under our contract, or if we're going to have to go out and find a new lobbyist. So we'll let you know as we hear things progress on that. That's a real shock for us that knew him. This guy was he seemed like an old basketball player. The guy's like 7'12", feet on him like two skis. He takes a stride, and it takes me two and a half steps to get up to his one. He had us walking all over the Capitol, but the nicest guy you won't meet. Just a super gentleman. So, okay, let's get the committee meeting going. Okay, before we go with that, I understand you wanted to say something?
Sure.
Are you okay?
I'd
Okay.
be happy to. Yeah, I wasn't sure how, probably not the right lead in, but
Okay.
in any case, yeah, I just want to make a comment.
Oh.
Which. Okay. So the comment I'd like to make is, so we had a discussion at the last meeting concerning chairing of this meeting. And I made a bunch of comments about the fact that I thought that it was important from a public relations point of view that we have the chair be from Washington, given a whole bunch of the history. And what didn't occur to me is that that we all had not been in the room through the bi-state working group sessions. So I was just assuming that everybody knew and everybody understood that what I was saying was not in any way reflecting on Mike Fox. And it was explained to me afterwards that if you hadn't been in the room, you might have thought that there was something going on behind the scenes and that I was in some way expressing a lack of support or a lack of faith in Mike. And what I can just say is it's just incredibly simple. Anyone who's been involved in the process knows that we're not where we are, but for the work that Mike put in, and that we will not get a bridge built without Mike's work on it. So I hope that there was no, I hope I didn't confuse anybody. If I did confuse anybody, I want to correct it and make sure unambiguously that everybody understands that this is not about a question of Mike's leadership or Mike's abilities. It's a question of the public relations of how we bring the Washington team in more effectively. And I think that we have a great solution here now with Jake starting out as chair and then Mike becoming chair in 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever you guys figured out. I think that that's a great way to sort of tell the folks in Washington that that we have a distinct change from the history of them being disenfranchised in bridge stuff to them being enfranchised in bridge stuff, but that it's absolutely nothing to do with Mike. And I was just really surprised when people even suggested that I might have raised that confusion because it just never entered my mind. So I want to get that out. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for that. I appreciate it very much. You know, I've worked real hard trying to make this bridge happen, and I appreciate the kind words. One word for all of us to think about. If you look at the port in the past, one could say was a different port, and people were upset with them and so on. But if you really take a look at a year ago, a little over a year ago, what the port looked like to what it is today. The executive director is no longer there. We have a new executive director. The CFO is a new CFO. The legal counsel is a new legal counsel. The head of maintenance is a new head of maintenance. So the port looks drastically different, you know, from a year ago. And I personally think it's a good move to help us get this bridge done. And I would just offer a kind of a caution as we go out and we're the ambassadors to this new bridge. There's a lot of upset folks out in the field. We got to constantly tell them that it's a new port. It's not the old port. And for us in here, we're now in charge. So whatever we make it is, we make it. We can kind of blame the port for past history, but that's going to get old here pretty quick. So I would just offer something to think about. You got to look at yourself and decide how you want to portray it, and that's fine. But just thought I'd bring that up. But thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
Mike, may I say a couple of words?
Speak.
I just want, I've worked with Commissioner Fox for multiple years now, and I have the utmost respect for Commissioner Fox. He has taken this bridge. He has the time and the desire and more importantly, the knowledge to get us where we are today. All the other members of the bi-state working group, we all served, you know, as directors or commissioners or mayors. And Mike has been able to put the time in because we all have counties to run. And now that we're part of the new, you know, bridge authority, we don't represent those counties or the cities. We represent the new bridge. And Mike, if anybody more than anyone else who was part of the Port Commission, has always represented the bridge and always put the bridge first. And he's always been forced to toe a really difficult line because the port's goals and directives might have been a little bit different than the bi-state bridge authorities. And Mike has always put the bridge first. And I have full faith and credit in Mike Fox. He's an amazing gentleman. And thank you very much, Commissioner, for your kind words. I know you were not trying to in any way insinuate that it was about Mike, but in the political and in the perspectives of the community. But in the end, we're all working towards this new bi-state bridge authority. And so thank you for your words.
Sorry, if I could just, not to belabor a point, but obviously having jumped in on that conversation at the last meeting, I would echo everything that's been said. I think that's the tough part in these positions or in these government roles that we find ourselves in, is that it's really less about the singular people and more about often the optics and perception and the positions we hold. And Mike's been nothing but instrumental, I think, in helping to move the project forward. And I still, and you know I kind of, sorry, Jake, threw you in first in the ring, but I think we came in always knowing that the both of you were chairs. And so to me, that equal representation and leadership from both of you remains. And I guess if I could just stray for 1 second, and this is probably my old professional experience in television where someone passes and you have a moment of silence and an obituary, but I think to do justice to Hal and the wonderful man that he was, obviously there's this logistical part of us needing to make some decisions, but I think those are so minor compared to the loss that his family's feeling. And I think that's where my heart is. And I trust that the rest of this team who worked with him and even everyone on the call, he's been on this call for years, not only working to move our project forward for our communities, but so many others. And I think what he left on everyone was the impression that it was service first to the things that really moved the community. But it just in the few short times we spent with him, he was so much deeper and richer as a person in his interests. And he wasn't just our lobbyist or someone who was a coworker to his peers, but I really just think a moment to appreciate this was a very unexpected and dramatic loss of a life that I think no one saw coming, certainly his family. And I think we're all just keeping our thoughts with them. And thank you. I know Mike relayed that the port would be sending and the authority would be sending arrangements and a note to his family when they're going through the service. But for anyone, I think that wants further information, probably reach out to Mike, I would imagine gets that info, but yeah, he'll be missed.
Yeah, the further information on the burial and so on, Kevin's going to be coordinating that for us. So it was just too early a couple of days ago, so he'll reach back out this week and pass it on to us. Okay, let's move on. Project Director Bridge update.
All right, thank you. I did this. One thing I did want to bring up to the group, we do want to do a group photo. We've got a few folks missing today, so we're actually not going to do it today, but we do need to, if we can get everybody at the August meeting or sooner, we would like to get a group meeting of everyone. So we'll organize that and get everybody together to do that. On the watch, just, yes.
Social media is real hard when I go past it. So thank you.
Oh, good. We met with Washington DOT on their biennium funding, and just an update on that. It looks like they are going to make it 5 million in state funds, 10 million federal funds. We are having some conversations about whether or not can all be state funds. And we'll come back if they can switch that, but that would give us a lot more local match to use. But right now they're looking at 5 million state funds, 10 million federal funds. What that'll mean for us is an agreement between us and WashDOT for the 5 million state, and then WashDOT and ODOT, because ODOT is the federal lead on the project. They will have to do an agreement between WashDOT and ODOT, and then ODOT will do an agreement with us or add it to an existing federal fund that we already have with ODOT. But that needs to be clarified with HRWSBA exactly how that works, because nobody's completely sure on how it works, because it's going from one state to another, even though it is federal. So we will start working through that with them. But it's a complexity to getting money from WashDOT to us that's going to take a little bit of time. So just wanted to make sure everybody's aware that that is not something that we're going to get that funding like tomorrow. There will be some time in getting those agreements together and getting that funding. So
This is only going to get worse. So we've got to figure out a smoother way to get this thing set up as we go forward. It's going to be a real mess.
one of the things that we need to also do, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just. I'm really having trouble understanding what we're talking about here. So are you saying that the 15 million that the Washington legislature has authorized for us, that they're trying to decide the different flavors of the different parts of the money? Okay.
How it flows.
Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, the 15 million this biennium, they're going to use 5 million of that is state funding, 10 million of it is federal money. In order to get it to us, we have to do an agreement with Washington DOT for the 5 million, and then a separate agreement between Washington and ODOT to get the federal money to the project, because ODOT is the lead agency for the feds. So Washington has to send that money over to ODOT in order to get it onto the project. The thing is nobody really knows that exact path and where it will go when it comes to ODOT.
So with the city and the county, when we take federal monies and pass it through ODOT, ODOT keeps part of it. Do we know?
There was no discussion about ODOT keeping any of it. Now, I am sure there will be some administrative in the agreement we do with ODOT for them to provide administrative duties, that would not surprise me. And it will probably fund, like we do now, some of their review or engagement in the project through the agreement that we have with them now.
I call this the ODOT's money laundering fee, and it happens on a regular basis. And any dollars that we get that flow in this way, ODOT takes several % off the top on it as a processing fee.
So I have a quick question. It's because we need a fiscal sponsor for ODOT is ODOT acting as our fiscal sponsor? Or could the ODOT is acting as our fiscal sponsor? Is it because we don't want to use the Port of Hood River? We're not certified, the Port of Hood River is not certified as a fiscal sponsor.
Or to be a federal recipient.
Okay. And so is there a way that we could find a different fiscal sponsor? That's not ODOT because of the known potential administrative fees that are being taken off? Because ODOT has a set standard percentage to take off and other people might be able to offer a lower percentage of the total money.
So right now, ODOT is the only certified agency. WashDOT used to have that role and WashDOT gave that responsibility to ODOT. So yes, could the port become a certified or the bridge authority become a certified agency to work directly with FHWA? That is a possibility. It is highly unlikely we would be able to get through the certification process because we don't have enough history in similar projects to be certified. So we would have to find potentially another county that's maybe certified could do that. But we could look down that path. I think what we're going to find out is it's always going to push us back to ODOT.
I guess first we need to find out if ODOT is planning to take a fee, and if they are, maybe they will agree to rebate it to us, being that we're basically doing a project that by all rights they should be doing.
Well, that sounds nice. I wouldn't get your hopes up. Washington takes their cut. Everybody takes their cut.
All right, so we also have a visit by the Joint Transportation Commission from Washington. They're going to be down on the 27th. They're actually doing a tour of the bridges over the Columbia. They'll be stopping at our project on the 27th. They'll be doing lunch at the Best Western. If you want to attend that, just let me know. And I'll get you on a list for people to attend that event. We'll be doing a short presentation, about a 30-minute presentation discussion with them. Basically an update on the project. So if you'd like to attend, just let me know.
I would really encourage everybody, if you can, to sign up to go. I think it's really important if we could get the full board and the alternates there. It really shows strong support, and I would offer up with our communications group that this would be a good one for the new members to actually make the presentation instead of us older folks. Okay.
All right, there's also, we were working on a congressional staff tour. We'll have to pick that up in a couple weeks on the date and timing of that. So that'll be something just we'll get the details out to you. We also have a Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation or ACT. There's a meeting on August 7th. Myself and Marla are going to attend. The presentation is an update on the Bridge Authority as well as an update on the bridge. Right now, where I'm gearing the presentation is from some conversations that came out of actually the meeting with WashDOT. I think we need to get out and do as many presentations as we can to other agencies about what the Bridge Authority is. So I've kind of taken the Oregon House bill and summarized it down to kind of key things that the Bridge Authority is allowed to do. Because a lot of the agencies don't understand what we can and cannot do. And the authority actually has a lot of ability to do things even that the port was not allowed to do, being a bi-state agency. So I think the more we can get that out and presentations to folks on that. But I also think that once we get legal counsel on board, we should have them go through that and actually come in and do a more formal presentation with this group on legally where are your responsibilities, because right now we're just kind of parroting what the bill says, but it would be good to get legal opinion on where maybe there's some challenges to that and and what we can and can't do, but
I would just offer up, I think it's great you two guys are going. Maybe this could be, where is this gonna be?
Best Western and Hood Road.
Okay, so maybe, I don't know, your thoughts on inviting one of the new members to go with you guys, if for nothing else, to observe, you know, how you're addressing the issues. So the more we can get people involved, the less we have to do it, and kind of adds to the flavor, I think. So I would encourage whoever would like to go.
I'm already there.
Okay,
Yeah,
So-
Arthur happens to be there for another reason. Oh. Yeah, Arthur's, I think you're on the agenda. Yeah, and okay, and Grant's actually gonna be there, so there's a few, so if another one needs to go, that's.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Zola?
Yeah, he's on.
Oh, the other thing that's coming out of DC right now is the appropriations that we submitted. If you remember back, we wrote a bunch of letters for the congressional appropriations. Right now, and it's not finalized, it's one more step closer. We've got $1 million from Blumenauer, 4 million from Newhouse, and 4 million from Merkley and Wyden. So we could end up with as much as 9, we could end up with as little as 1. Once they get together and kind of finalize this, but somewhere between now and the end of the year, if all goes well, we will see some additional money. But I think the positive thing is that they all are recognizing this project and moving it forward in these. Says a lot about how they see the project. So I think that's all positive news for us as far as our focus and what we're seeing in Congress and DC. So. One other item is we've got a public records training that we want to do. There was a doodle poll that was sent out. We ended up with really 2 dates out of that poll, but we need to hear back from other members if you did not respond to that. The 2 dates were the 7th from 2 to 4, which is in between our 2 meetings in August. And then the 14th from 4:30 to 6:30. So those were the two dates that the majority of the people that responded were able to make. So if those 2 dates work, please email me or email Jessica and let us know your preference of those 2 dates. And we'll get that public records training set up.
So let's move into the budget report. And are you going to do it, or is Brian going to do it?
We're going to do that when we do the presentation.
Okay. Okay, so let's get into the consent agenda. Is there any items that people would like to talk about? We have the approval and correction of the minutes, establishing of the bank account, date and time of organizational readiness workshop, the regular meeting time, location, and lastly, confirmation of executive director and finance director. Was there any comments that people would like to talk about on any of these items?
I think I'd like us to go through and talk about what we're
Okay.
actually doing in each case rather than just the title.
Okay, so we can do that. So approval and correction of the minutes. Minutes were attached to your package. Is there any corrections that anyone likes to make? If not, we'll go to the next one, which is establishment of the bank account. And I believe, if I remember right, it says we're going to use Umpqua Bank here in Hood River, but you can use any Umpqua Bank, and there's one over here as well.
And so in terms of signatures and stuff like that, are we authorizing signatures?
Yeah, what's
Yeah.
on the item was for the authorization, of first co-chair, second co-chair, and the finance director.
Right. And needs all 3.
And you already are acting finance director, is that correct?
Yeah, that's going to be
Get that
down the road here a little bit on the agenda, but yes, she is the acting CFO. Okay, regular meeting, time, date, and location. We said the 1st and 3rd or 2nd?
We skipped one, the organizational readiness.
Oh, yeah, yeah, organizational readiness workshop. You have the date on that?
September 18th from 12 to 4.
Regular meeting date, which is,
And yeah, the regular meeting date, the proposed regular meeting date is the second and fourth Mondays from 2 to 4.
Has any consideration been given to having an occasional meeting on the Oregon side?
We can, yes, right now it was just set up.
but you gotta use your,
Right now it's set up to do it at the White Salmon City Council chambers. If you choose to change that, we can alternate it, whatever, however you want to handle that.
I just have two thoughts on the time, since, this was kind of the schedule we set up when we were a working group and not beholden to public participation as much, and middle of the day meetings are very hard for working people. And I think also just appreciating that now that we're a larger group, I think many of us have professions. And so I just did actually want to throw it out for discussion. Does this time actually work for first the commissioner schedules? But even given that, do we want to consider a time that's more accessible to our public? Because as this project moves forward and we are going to have key decisions being made, and if we want public participation, I think 2 to 4 is a tough window to ever get true in-person attendance and comment.
how do people feel? Some of the other meetings are 5 to 7 or 5 to 7:30 or so on, or we could do it later than that. Do you have any? Let's talk about it for a few minutes. I'm very flexible.
I'll talk over you.
I
Well,
think the idea of at least putting it right on the shoulder of the end of the day makes a lot of sense. If you get too late in the evening, I know a lot of people kind of shut down and it's not a good time to be making big decisions. But it seems 2 to 4 does seem to kind of blow the afternoon.
How do you folks feel about 5 to 7? Or do you want to go 6 to 8?
If it's a different day or time, you have a number of people that have a number of different commitments, either through various counties in each state or city governments. So trying to coordinate and find another date or time may be more challenging than what we've already established as Mondays, 2 to 4. But I am fine with 2 to 4. I'm also flexible on changing it.
I guess in Oregon, you're gonna have a lot of trouble scheduling on Mondays or Tuesdays, given that we have most of the other agencies, which some of us are involved in, are Mondays and Tuesdays. But I do like the idea. I really, we need to be getting out more, and we need to be there at times when people can see us, even if they don't take advantage of it. I think there's a real symbolism to that. So I like the idea of us moving around on occasion, getting to Bingen, getting to Hood River. And I also like the idea of it being, sometime after 5 o'clock.
Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say it's a different world we live in today because we have Zoom and these meetings are recorded and the people and the public can view them at any time. I think what matters is what works best for the group, because this is technically our meeting and people have the ability to comment. If we are going to be making big decisions, I think what we do at the county is we have a meeting during the day, then we hold another public hearing during the evening, whether it's for road standards or anything else. And we find that people show up during the day just as much as they show up during the evening, if they do want to comment. And then there's always, public comment that can be in writing. I've found that, what we're dealing with right now is a whole lot of misperception and miscommunication from the public. And it's Facebook that's where we need to be, not our meeting. Most people don't have the time to meet for our meeting. Where they get their information is from Facebook. I have no problem with 2 to 4 on Mondays. 5 to 7 or 6 to 8, I find gets harder because people want to be at home with their families or they've got school sports. And those are the times. 2 to 4 for me works pretty good.
just again, as we're setting this, and it can certainly change with a new governing body, but I just think the workday hours like this, there is a maybe dangerous assumption that the only people who will be serving are those who have the luxury of setting their own work schedule. But if we're genuinely trying to be inclusive and encourage people from our community to step up and serve, we have to appreciate some people might be beholden to more traditional work schedules or don't have flexibility between 9 to 5. So maybe it's something that's revisited later and if the time works, but I just wanted to create space that now that we have more people here, if there are people who are now serving and volunteering that have more structured work days and they need the flexibility for our meeting, their meeting to be at a different time, I just think that we should be open and understanding.
So I have a suggestion on this. This is not something we have to decide today. So I think this might be a good thing for us to sort of think about. I think we've gotten all the ideas out there. Let's think about it and maybe ask around, ask some folks, I do have the fear of that you get the usual suspects if you have the meeting during the day, and that's been my experience, but it sounds like Jake's had a different experience, and I'd love to hear more about kind of how Klickitat County does it. So I would like to take this particular decision, postpone it to next meeting.
What I would suggest that maybe we do a survey between now and the next meeting of the alternates in the board, give them several options, and see what comes back. And then we can have a discussion. If that's okay, we'll go ahead and get that done.
The information, we gather information.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, we could just continue for the next couple meetings as we are. And allow the governance committee to take this up as one of their items. Or we could do a poll and try to solve it earlier if you feel like we need to solve it earlier. The thing with a poll is it won't be making the decision. We're just going to be collecting information that would then come back to the board for a decision. So
I think your public meeting folks would tell you that you should be doing a poll. In fact, Robert's Rules of Order specifically prohibits straw polls. So I like your idea of forwarding this to the governance committee. It doesn't exist yet, but will.
Okay, so with that, we'll do that. But for the next several meetings, no change. Everybody 2 to 4 on the Mondays, and it's in this room. We can change it later.
do you need to modify the consent agenda then?
Okay, item E, confirmation of executive director and finance director. The package basically suggests that the port's executive director and the port CFO act as our interim executive director and CFO until we decide somewhere down the road, a year, whatever we decide, change that. But that's what that document basically says.
And the language uses the word interim, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, any further discussions on the consent items? If not, could I get a motion?
I will make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the amendment of moving the discussion on meeting time and date to the, what was the committee again? Governance committee.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Marla, you were okay with it? And Jake?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. We've agreed with the consent agenda. No committee reports, presentations, funding and finance.
So we're gonna have 2 presentations today. Carrie Witt's gonna do the first on funding and finance, and then we're gonna switch over, and Brian Munoz is online, is gonna do one on just dashboard reporting and how we're telling you about what Carrie's gonna tell you about.
All right. Well, thank you and good afternoon. And I just want to comment, first of all, that I have really enjoyed meeting several of you over the last week. in our one-on-one interviews that we've been having relative to the organizational readiness. And for those of you who we haven't had a chance to sit down with, I'm really looking forward to that. It is an hour that I have really enjoyed with several of you, and hope to finish that up by meeting with the rest of you. So what I wanted to do this afternoon is just give you an update and a status report and an overview, really, of the funding and financing, the financial plan, so to speak, for this project. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about cash flow and how important that is. Review with you the sources of funding and financing, and I will say that Brian is going to go into much more detail about this in his presentation, so I won't. Oh, not yet. Then I want to take a look at our 2023 activities so far in the world of funding and finance, and look at some very important next steps that are pending. Then we want to really dig into the grant application that we are just all hands working on right now. It's due about a month from now, and we are pulling out all the stops to develop a world-class grant application worthy of the $200 million that we're asking for. And that'll be, we're going to talk a little bit about our strategy for that grant, and also talk about in some detail our benefit cost analysis. Next slide, please. There we go. So this is a little hard to read. You're all going to get a copy of this, and really what's more important than the individual numbers that are included on this slide is the concept that not only is it important that we get allocated from federal, state, and local sources the full amount of money that we need to build this project, which is $520 million today, but it's important that that money flow to us when it's needed. We want to make sure that we always have money ready for the next step. And as Mike, as we've learned and as we know, both at the federal and state levels, the money does tend to flow in smaller tranches year by year. The states operate on a biennium process. Federal government operates on an annual allocation process. And what's important is that we get not only the commitment for the full amount of money that we need, but we need that money to be committed. We need a commitment as well that that money will be delivered at a certain time over the next 7 years to make sure that we always have enough money to do the next step of the project. Brian's going to talk about this in some detail. Next slide, please. There is a graph that shows this same information, just presented graphically. What you see there in the kind of gray, or I'm sorry, the kind of yellow, under the yellow curve there is the cumulative spending over the duration of the project, leading up to $520 million at the end. You can see the dark blue and blue is money that's already allocated. I'm sorry, the green line that you see above the dark blue and blue is money that's already been committed. Now, that doesn't mean the money's in our bank account. It means the money has been committed. And as Mike was saying, there is some importance to not only having it delivered on time, but there's importance to which pocket or what color that money is when it comes to us. And that's something that we're still working out. Next slide, please. Kind of reviewing, this is all information that you've seen. You may be tired of looking at it. I am. But one of the things that's important is there's significant commitment of funding from both Oregon and Washington to date. And what we don't know yet is what portion of that money is federal, what portion of that is state. And there's an opportunity perhaps to influence those decisions. If not, it's just really important that we understand that, because we are on the hook for a certain amount of matching funds that have to be non-federal in origin. So if Oregon or Washington gets $10 million, for instance, on the Washington case, if Washington gets $10 million in federal money through formula grants or some other mechanism and decides that to give that to this project, that is not state money and that can't be used as a match. That counts towards the federal contribution to this project, which can't exceed 80% of the total project cost. Our estimations now that we're nowhere near that danger point, but we are keeping a really close eye on making sure that we have enough matching, non-federal matching funds. And it's also a sliding scale. That has to be on a year-to-year basis. It's not just at the end of the day. You constantly have to be matching the federal contribution with local contributions as you go through the project. And so it's a bit of a complex exercise. And Brian's going to talk a little bit more about how we're tracking and monitoring all that. The important part of this slide is just to look at the left-hand side and say, these are the targets. And those haven't changed since we started talking about this financial plan a year and a half ago, or at least since I started talking about it. There really are just those sources of funding that you see. There's the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, there's the federal government, and then there's the local contribution. And when we talk about local contribution, what we're talking about is bridge tolls. And the theory right now is that those bridge tolls get leveraged through financing to provide a significant contribution upfront that gets paid for over the next 30 years with toll dollars. So next slide, please. So this is our status as of today. It shows that commitments so far are at about 23% of the need. Again, the exact shade or color of all of those dollars needs to be carefully gone through, but that's not a bad place, and it's a big improvement over where we were 1 year ago. And so we are definitely headed in the right direction, and I'm very encouraged. The biggest slices of that pie remaining are federal contribution that we need to the tune of about $200 million. And I'm going to talk in some detail, or my team is going to talk in some detail about that coming up. Just looking at the key activities in calendar year 2023. Next slide, please, Kelly. We have spent, and when I say we, the funding, financing, and tolling team, the team that I'm leading in support of this project, has spent significant time early on in the year supporting the toll increase that has now been voted into effect by the Port of Hood River Board to take effect September 1st, 2023, and really sets this agency up to be in a good position to go for financing in 26 or 27 when we're going to be actually going through a creditworthiness process to borrow money. We've also invested heavily in supporting the traffic and revenue study that was paid for and sponsored by the Washington State Transportation Commission. And that document will inform several things. It has informed much of our work in support of the toll increase and in support of some of our federal grants to prove that we are going to have the traffic and the revenue to support all of the things we want to do. It will also be the foundation of what's called an investment grade traffic and revenue study that this agency will need to do as we get closer to financing. In order to actually apply for financing through TIFIA or bonding, either way, we will need an investment grade credit rating. And in order to earn that kind of credit rating, they will rely a lot on a study or a document called an investment grade traffic and revenue study. And I would say where we are today, we're probably 2/3 of the way to that. If we leverage the work that was done this year by Washington State Transportation Commission, they paid about $1.5 million for that study. The additional increment that we will have to do to get to investment grade is probably, sorry, I need to ditch a spam. So yeah, it doesn't get any better than that. But we will need to pay for that probably around $750,000 at some point in time in the next few years. Here's a bit of good news. I'm going to talk about this a little more detail in just a second. We found out just last month that we had actually been awarded a RAISE grant for which we applied back in the spring, $3.6 million. And the next step in terms of work product there will be for us to work with the US DOT in establishing a grant agreement that will talk about how that grant gets administered over the next few years. Yes, sir.
if I could, I want to interrupt on that particular one. I think that particular grant is to pay for a study taking our various bike paths on both sides of the river down to the new bridge. So it's the connection piece. And what I think we got to be very careful in our funding scenarios and the financial, that is not part of the $520 million. So we don't want to see that 3.6 million on a little chart that says, yeah, we got 3.6 against the 520. It has nothing to do with the 520. And if we're successful getting additional grants for development of that section, that needs to be kept separate. It's a separate project from physically doing the bridge.
I would like to modify that just a tiny bit by saying that the raise grant was actually very carefully crafted to also be allowed to pay for preliminary design, up to 60% design of the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, which is actually included in the overall design costs for the bridge. So I believe we're in a position to do some of that. Now,
I would offer up to you though, between us, that $3.6 million, if we're going to use that to quote, design the one lane on the bridge, that 3.6 is going to go away very quickly because you can't do the one lane versus the whole bridge. So yeah, I know how it was written, but the intent is the feeders.
Right.
yes, sir.
Could I see this is something we need to put this on our agenda and discuss it. I have a different understanding. I don't think I agree with you, but I want to talk it through. And I think we'll be able to figure it out.
That's a good segue into the next item, which is that we have just submitted a grant application for a Safe Streets for All grant. And the Safe Streets for All really is the grant that's more focused on planning for the integration of your bicycle and pedestrian facilities into the overall project, and really talks heavily about connections on both ends of the bridge, connections to existing bicycle plans in the communities north and south of the bridge. We've applied for $1 million, and what that will allow us to do is to leverage some of the raise grant money to develop what's called an action plan under the Safe Streets program. In order to qualify for Safe Streets implementation grants, which can be a pretty significant sum of money, you have to have an action plan, and then the next step is you apply for an implementation grant to implement your action plan. So we've asked for $1 million to help us go through this planning process to have a Safe Streets for All implementation plan developed in the next year, which hopefully would put us in a good position to apply for those implementation grants later. That really gets us up to date to today. We're working, as I mentioned, we are all hands on deck working right now on the MPDG grant application, and we're going to go into pretty significant detail on that in just a minute. We're expecting in the fall, probably September-ish, to see a notice of funding opportunity come out for another very big grant program, for which we will again ask for $200 million, and that's the Bridge Investment Program under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And then a couple other major things we're working on right now is a TIFIA letter of interest, which is really just a document. And it's more than just a letter. So I don't want to leave anybody thinking we're just going to write them a quick letter and say, hey, we want you to think about us. The TIFIA letter of interest really is the first step in entering the process of potentially borrowing money from the federal government under the TIFIA program. So that will be kind of that will be the official start of an application to borrow money. And finally, as the year wraps up, we're going to start down the path of a toll policy and tolling systems assessment for the agency, which is related to funding and financing because tolls are going to be the primary way that we support the necessary financing on this project. And so we really need to understand, and we'll be engaging you in what the toll policies will be, how those tolls will be collected, those kinds of things. One of the primary things that we'll answer early on in this process is a question that I believe Commissioner Fox, you asked at the last meeting, which was, what are the pros and cons of including the toll system in the design build contract versus having the authority pursue the toll system procurement separate from the design build contract? And we'll go through an analysis of the pros and cons of doing it both ways. It's done both ways. And there are reasons you might choose to do it one way or the other once you have all those facts.
Sir, quick question. So is the raised grant funding earmarked for bike path use only
Yes, but bike pit and transit.
in transit?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes. No, transit was an important component of that as well.
So Carrie, just, I note on your slide there, the TIFIA letter of interest, late 23. Just want to remind you, and we need to talk about this more. The last two times we were out talking to the Department of Transportation, they kept really suggesting to us that we get a letter of interest in early. And I'd like to have a discussion with you. Why would we go back there again without another letter when I know they're going to ask for it? So if we're likely to go back in support of the grant in August or September, why wouldn't we have that TIFIA letter there before we get there?
Well, so the trip back there in August or September was new to me today. I have been planning, we had talked about a trip back there in December, and that was our target for having the letter of interest. I certainly can work with the team and see if we can accelerate that process. I will acknowledge a group that we've been working with quite a bit lately that will help us tremendously in this regard is the Port of Hood Rivers, and now by, I guess, by osmosis or something, your municipal advisor, PFM. And they have actually built some models of the level of sophistication that TIFIA will be expecting for their letter of interest in order to do some financial modeling in support of that.
Yeah, I think we just need to talk about this, so we don't go back there and say, we talked about this for 3 years, 2 years.
Next slide, please. So I did want to just give you an update because I think this is noteworthy on the RAISE grant. And what I think it does is it does point to a sense in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Department of Transportation and among the political people involved in that this project has definitely caught their attention and is top of mind. So we were awarded $3.6 million. And again, it's for planning and preliminary design activities related to bicycle, pedestrian, and transit access on the replacement bridge. And that is right out of the grant application. One of the things that is noteworthy about this, and this is very rare for federal grants, is there is no local match required. We get the full $3.6 million without any local match requirement. There were 162 awards for $2.6 billion out of 1,100 applicants and over 15 billion requested. And so I do think that speaks a bit to the perceived merit of this project. The format of this grant, it's a monthly reporting and reimbursement. And so it will require us to have some means of liquidity to pay on a month-to-month basis, which will probably be minimal. I don't think we'll have any problem with that, but we will. It's a reimbursement grant, and it can be reimbursed by non-federal money that we have from some of our state grants. Funds have to be obligated by September of 2027 and fully expended by 2032. I see no problem there because we expect to have this bridge open and traffic flowing long before that. And so the next step there is we expect them to open up, and they haven't opened the discussions yet, but we're thinking in the next month or two, they will be ready to start actually discussing grant agreement. And we have seen the template of the agreement that we're going to be working from. They've provided that. They're just not set up quite yet to start actually talking about the actual grant agreement.
So carry on this one. If I was wrong and what you're saying, it's for money for the bicycle path on the bridge.
On the bridge.
Okay, when we get this grant going, are we going to have segregated funds as you get into design? When you design a bridge, you're going to design the whole bridge. You're not designing a piece of it. So when designers are in there spending money, they're spending money on this, not just this piece. So are we going to have to try and segregate true costs of design for that, or can we commingle?
We have already worked with our estimators to actually come up with a segregated cost that the presence of a bicycle pedestrian facility on the bridge. And I think the number we came up with is around $54 million out of the 520 total. And so it will be possible to at least in some sense do that. We'll have to think about that. We're going to have to think about how to segregate that, because we are going to have to show at least that $3.6 million was spent on what we said it would be spent on.
So I've got a lot of experience on this particular issue, and if we're not careful, we get ourselves into a real big hole, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think we need to have some discussions as this thing goes forward, splitting out from an estimate what the bicycle path is going to cost. That's easy. As you start developing your design and saying this piece of the design really belongs to that piece of funding, is going to get really complicated really fast if the federal government expects any level of accuracy. So there's a whole philosophy that we got to be thinking about and get ready for if that's what they're going to expect. And this is just the first one.
I do believe that's what they're going to expect. And so I think we are going to have to figure out exactly how we're going to deal with that.
I said, we're staffing up to bring somebody in just to monitor these grants and make sure we're invoicing and billing against the right ones, because this is just the beginning of them and there will be more. So there's a whole process to doing that for every one of these.
Okay, but I'm trying to tell you that the real challenge is not creating the invoice, is taking the work effort and say this piece of the effort goes to that piece. That's really difficult to do accurately. So if we think through it and we get pre-agreements with the federal government that we can work on a percentage split or something like that, but you gotta codify it. Otherwise, we are so audit bait. They could walk in here and there's no way we're gonna withstand an audit. So, something to think about.
This is Marla. I have a question, and sorry if this was said earlier and I missed it, but I just wanted to confirm with these funds through the RAISE grant that was awarded that some of that planning is also about the extension of the bike ped network, especially on the North Shore and leading into the Washington communities. Is that correct?
Yes, and in particular, the Safe Streets for All action plan will be focused on that as well.
Great.
Rather, I would say, as opposed to extension, because the money will have to be spent on the bridge and within the sphere of influence of the bridge, it is about the connection of the new facilities on the bridge to the existing bicycle and pedestrian and transit networks that already exist in the counties and the cities.
Right. So since our counties are, on the North Shore of the bridge, where we are not as developed on those connection points, if those connection points don't exist, do these funds help to fund the planning that will be needed, and then coordination or handoff potentially if it's determined that the extension, say, to the Amtrak stop or the extension to the Bluff Trail needs to then be handed to City of White Salmon or Benjamin or a different entity to actually seek implementation funding. But the planning can be done through this grant because it is about building out that network.
I believe so. And this is a planning grant. And it's very hard to draw hard lines on a planning
Yeah.
grant that's connecting
Yeah.
to other networks.
Great.
I think it's obvious at this point, but just so we're all kind of thinking the same thing. It's the North Shore really doesn't have a network yet to connect to. And I think that's what Marla is starting to talk about is do we get that planning on what that network needs to be, whether it's funded with the bridge or not, but at least knowing where we're headed.
See, I thought incorrectly, so I thought the 3.6 million grant was to do just that. It's off the bridge, the initial connection point, but wherever you have to go to get it to an existing trail. Okay, now maybe that's safe streets. I don't know, but I think we've got to get some definition before we go spend a bunch of money on stuff that may not qualify.
So what I would offer up is as we get to this, the actual agreement on this grant, we will define better what the scope of the work is. So I think we need to sit down and do that because the grant was written very broadly to give us flexibility. And I think now we need to put some scope to what that is. So that'll be something we do as we work through this planning grant and get the grant agreement.
And just a quick question, we're gonna have all those grant agreements reviewed by legal, correct? Just making
Oh,
sure.
yes.
Just make sure.
I was just gonna add, a representative from Safe Streets came to present to Hood River County about a month and a half ago. And I know that the Hood River County is considering updating their comprehensive plan next year. But maybe having the Safe Streets representative come could be helpful, talk with us about this.
All right, thank you. Next step, please, or next slide, please. So one of the things that has come up, and then we're going to transition into talking about the grants that we're applying for going forward. But a question that has come up, and I just wanted to shed a little bit of light on it, maybe not a lot. I'm not a lawyer. Sometimes I play one on TV. The legislation that created this authority did shed some light on the, and I put this in quotationship, on the ownership or the responsibility for state and federal grants going forward. And basically in two parts, and this is right out of the Oregon House bill that authorizes the existence of this agency. They basically say that existing grants that already exist will continue to be owned by the original agency, in this case, the Port of Hood River, until such time as either the commission and the port agree that it needs to be transitioned, or until such time as the grant is expended and finished. And so that's the status that we're in with all of the money that has been committed to date. And that doesn't, maybe not even committed, the money that's been appropriated to date. I would say that this provision applies to the 15 million that Washington has appropriated, maybe not to the entire 75 million. And this is important because it does speak to exactly the direction we're going with the new grants. The legislation is very explicit that following the formation date of the commission is the applicant for all federal, state, or local grants for the bridge, unless the commission agrees otherwise. And so the direction that we have and the direction that we're headed at this moment is that it is this commission that is applying for all of the grants in the future.
No, I was going to add one thing to that, and this is for the group, maybe a short discussion on this. I would recommend we pursue the Washington and the Oregon funding that's out there to do those agreements with the authority because the agreements have not been done yet. That we start by pursuing them with, even though the bills may have been worded to be the port, that we pursue them to be done with the authority now that it's up and running.
And that speaks to my question to you, sir, is based on your information, would it be beneficial for us to try to get as much grant money in our own name as soon as possible to create that history for when we apply for future grant funding? Because of the short, we were just created, what, last week? I just think that we might not have as much of a depth of historical financial knowledge as opposed to the Port of Hood River. So I don't know if that's a consideration that you're making when you're moving forward, or if they ask for 5 years of past performance. I mean, we don't have 5 years of past performance. I'm just wondering if there's how you're playing with that one.
In fact, experience administering federal grants is, and it's a minor one, but it is an evaluation criteria for federal grants. And it's one that, because the Port of Hood River has some experience receiving and administering federal grants, represents a bit of a dilemma for us, especially on these big grants. The overall balance, and we've vetted this with several people to see what they think. The balance of opinion seems to be, especially based on the enabling legislation, that it is time for the commission to jump in the pool, and that we will just need to present that. You know, many of the people involved in this process have been involved in the port over the years. We share a finance director, and you know, we have good technical expertise at our disposal here. We have thought about and have not yet made a decision and want to consult with folks, and I don't necessarily want to do it in this forum, but whether it makes sense for maybe Port of Hood River to be a co-applicant. There may be pluses and minuses to that. I'm not sure the willingness, and I'm not sure how much it helps or hurts, but I think we'll want to discuss that. Next slide, please. Whew. So now we're actually going to talk about the specifics of the grant program that we're applying for right now. And one of the things that I like to do as a team leader is to actually introduce all of you to some of the people who are on my team who are actually doing all the work. And I think there's a couple benefits to that. First of all, it introduces you to some of the folks who, as I say, are much deeper technical experts than I on some areas and are actually doing the work. They get to know you, you get to know them. And so that's a positive. The other positive is that it saves me from having to pretend to be an expert in some of these really highly technical areas. And so with that, I would like to introduce you first to Giridhar Reddy. And Reddy, as we call him, really is the conductor of the orchestra when it comes to putting together these grant agreements. He was responsible for the RAISE grant application and the SS4A application. And his role really is to take the input from this team of 7 people that we have working on this grant agreement, make sure that it all gets put together into a package that is ready on time for submittal to the federal government. And so at this point, what I wanted to do is just orient you a little bit to this grant program that we're applying for now. And so I'll turn it over to Reddy to walk us through that. Ready?
Yep, I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Kerry. Next slide, please, Kelly. As Kerry just introduced, I am Giridhar Reddy with HNTB, and I've been helping put together the grant applications this year for this project. The current one we are working on, and a big one at it, is the MPDG grant. This grant consists of 3 major sub-grants: the infra, the mega, and the rural. Infra is a grant that awards competitive grants for multimodal freight and highway projects of national or regional significance. Mega program supports large, complex projects that are difficult to fund by other means and likely to generate national or regional economic mobility or safety benefits. Rural grant program supports projects that improve and expand the surface transportation infrastructure in rural areas. The application this year for this grant, the MPDG, combines the funding cycles for the next 2 years and provides an opportunity for a total of $5.75 billion for applicants across the nation. The notice of funding opportunity from the US DOT was announced on June 26 this year. That was about a month ago. We have been diligently working on putting it together over the last month as the submission deadline of August 21st fast approaches. Next slide, please. Here I wanted to introduce to the group on what are the selection criteria the MPDG uses for evaluating applicants on. These are divided into three major categories here: project outcomes, economic analysis, and project readiness analysis that are shown in three different columns. Under project outcomes, the grant evaluates applicants on 6 criteria that are listed here. The USDOT places high importance on how an applying project addresses each of these project outcome areas. Under economic analysis, the grant evaluates the project's costs and predicted benefits. The projects are expected to provide a very thorough benefit cost analysis and show that the project's benefits will exceed its costs to be considered for an award. The third major selection criteria is the project readiness analysis. And it further looks at 3 sub-criteria to evaluate the project's readiness to move ahead if selected for funding. The USDOT has a scoring rubric they use to evaluate each of these evaluation criteria and assign ratings to. Ultimately, they combine the ratings from all of these subcategories to give an overall recommendation to the project, ranging between highly recommended, recommended, and not recommended. I outlined the requirements for the 3 major selection criteria here as well in the bottom row. In summary, a project needs to score high rating across all of these elements to achieve a highly recommended overall rating and receive funding. Next slide, please. Here is a brief overview of how the MPDG application scored in the 2022 application round. Under the project outcomes criteria, the project received a medium-high rating. One of the evaluation criteria listed under it, safety, was rated low. The economic analysis also received a low rating at the USDOT determined that the project's costs were going to exceed the predicted benefits as shown in the submitted benefit cost analysis in last year's round. The project readiness analysis received a medium rating as they determined that the project's financial and environmental permit status still needed some strength to be considered for a higher rating. As the application was rated low on a couple of fronts, the project ultimately received a not recommended overall rating in 2022. Next slide, please. So what is the plan for 2023? We are actively working on changing the result with this year's improved application. We're working on addressing each of the selection criteria with detailed focus to target receiving a high rating across all selection criteria and ultimately a highly recommended designation to receive funding. Over the next couple of slides, I want to briefly highlight how we are addressing improvements to each of these selection criteria. Next slide, please. Under the selection criteria, project outcomes, I stated earlier there are 6 sub-evaluation criteria. Here are some highlights of how each of it is being addressed. First up is safety. If you recall a bit earlier, I mentioned that the project received a low rating on the safety outcome criteria. We are working on improving the write-up of this section to highlight the bridge safety issues as a primary concern. The narrow lane widths, the lack of shared use path for bicycles and pedestrians, difficulties for transit and freight vehicles using the bridge. We are making sure to talk about the improved and reliable access to emergency service with the new bridge. Maritime safety issues will also continue to be highlighted. Finally, we also are going to be talking about some safety disbenefits with a no-bill scenario where the bridge closes and traveling public will be exposed to increased safety hazards due to a long detour. The next evaluation criteria is state of good repair. Under this criteria, we are highlighting the uncorrectable deficiencies with the bridge if the project fails to move forward. The restricted lane widths, the steel deck, the unmovable lift span, the seismic vulnerability, and high maintenance costs are all part of these. A new bridge corrects all of these deficiencies along with significantly reduced maintenance costs, and we want to highlight all of that information. The third evaluation criteria is the economic impacts, freight movement, and job creation. We are highlighting the improved freight access and connectivity the project will provide with the new bridge, both land and marine freight. We are highlighting how the new bridge provides improved tourism and recreational opportunities thanks to the new pedestrian bicycle shared use path. And lastly, how the project will have a great impact on job creation for the region, both during and after construction of the project. Next slide, please. The fourth outcome criteria is climate change, resiliency, and the environment. We're making sure to highlight how the new bridge provides positive impacts towards the climate and the environment, like how it reduces emissions and how it reduces the stormwater runoff into the river. The increased transit and active transportation options will also cater towards achieving these outcomes. Next evaluation criteria is equity, multimodal options, and quality of life. The area this project resides under falls under a couple of census tracts that are classified as historically disadvantaged, and we are making sure to highlight how the project directly benefits the disadvantaged populations. We are continuing to talk about expanded mobility options and increased economic opportunities for the region as a whole, and with the focus on equity with the new bridge. The sixth and the last project outcome criteria is innovation. We are highlighting how the project is using innovative technology by using all electronic toll collection, how the project is being delivered using an innovative delivery method, the progressive design build, and finally, how we are using innovative financing options like TIFIA to fund the project. These are all examples directly provided by the grants NOFO under innovation, and we are actively doing them. And therefore, we think we have a great advantage addressing this outcome criteria. Next slide, please. The next major selection criteria I want to highlight here is the project readiness analysis, under which there are three sub-evaluation categories. First is an environmental risk assessment, under which we are talking about how the project is further along in its NEPA process and how close we are to receiving a record of decision. We are also making sure to talk about the status of permits, potential risks, and mitigation strategies that we have identified. Next is the technical capacity and assessment, which is an evaluation to determine the technical capabilities of the applicant to deliver the project and utilize or monitor the grant funds as well. We're making sure to highlight the qualifications of the Bridge Authority and the consulting team with this regard. We're making sure to talk about how the bi-state working group has transitioned to the Bridge Authority and how the Bridge Authority will be handling the bridge affairs moving forward.
Let me interrupt you here for just a minute. Instead of going through all the details of the slides, I think you've given the team here a good understanding of the various elements that you've had to go through in this new application process. I can tell you, as we were around the bi-state working group, when the original assessment went in request, we almost missed it. We did it in 2 weeks. The entire application was written in 2 weeks, and we didn't do very well. So we came back as we hired HNTB. They weren't in position at that time. And HNTB took the reins. We sat down with the Federal Highway Department of Transportation. We got a really good debrief from our application the last time. HNDB is kicked off and spent several months getting ready for the new application and strengthened it greatly. So we feel pretty good that we're going to get a good hearing this time around. And one of the major elements outside of the verbiage is the cost estimate, rate of return. And maybe you can spend just a minute or two on that, because we're going to have to move on. We've got a half an hour left and still got a lot to get through.
Yep, absolutely. I think I'm almost done with mine here.
Thank you.
The next part is the benefit cost analysis that I'm going to let Carrie and Chris take off from here. So, but just to say that we are targeting all these criteria more focused to try and get a high rating and an overall highly recommended status for the project to try and get funding this year under this grant.
Thank you, Reddy. I do want to honor your time commitments here and move on. The heartbeat, the heart and soul of any federal grant application, and especially these big programs where you're asking for $200 million, is to show that the benefit of the project exceeds its cost. And there's what's called a benefit cost ratio that presents that. This is an incredible quantitative exercise. There are probably, and I don't think I'm exaggerating too much here, 100 pages of spreadsheets that back up this benefit cost analysis that looks at all aspects. And for this particular effort, we've got our team looking at a couple of things, and that is, we know the cost of the new bridge and all the benefits that the new cost brings. They're needing to quantify what those benefits are actually worth. And then we need to look at the cost of not doing a new bridge. And we've spent a lot of time looking at two scenarios that could happen, are likely to happen, if the new bridge doesn't increase. And the two approaches that we looked at on the no build scenario are that HDR has identified about $110 million worth of repairs that need to be made in this bridge in short order in order to keep it open and operating. So one approach we looked at is, what if we just pay for what we can pay for with the toll revenues that we have and the toll increase that we just received? How long could we keep this thing going? The other thing we looked at was, what if we were able to borrow the $110 million and do all of those repairs and then pay back the money that we spent on those repairs over time? What would that do for us? Chris and his team have spent considerable effort building a very detailed quantitative look at those three scenarios: new bridge, financing the repairs on the old bridge, or paying as you go from toll revenues. I'm going to turn it over now to Chris Kopp. Those of you on the Bi-State Working Group know Chris, but I'm going to ask him to walk us through where we are on the benefit cost analysis, which is almost complete.
Thanks, Kerry, and good to talk to you all again. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what I'd like to do today is just to review with you all our improvement plan after getting the feedback from USDOT and that debrief from last year's application, what we were planning to do, what we've done since our last briefing with some of you all back in May, and then I'd like to just review a few of the key assumptions that are driving the benefit evaluation that we have right now, and then show you what those draft results look like, and then just a little bit on next steps. We're, as Kerry said, we're in the last month here of putting this together, and we just got a little bit to do to finalize it. So next slide, please. So this is what we learned last time, is we went in with a benefit cost ratio of 1.05. A 1 means that your benefits exceed your costs. So we were just slightly over. But to get a high rating, we really need a 1.5. And unfortunately, that benefit cost analysis last year had some problems with it that meant that it may not even have been quite as good as 1.05. And so they marked us down and we got a low rating in cost effectiveness. The other thing is, obviously, the project has made great strides over the last year, and there's a lot of new inputs from not only just project work, but also this new traffic and revenue study that Washington State prepared. So we got everything synced up with that now. Next slide, please. A couple of the things that we set out to do were to improve the vehicle time savings calculations. And our idea was to build in this new traffic forecast from the TNR study, as well as take advantage of the higher speed limit over the bridge, as well as maybe a couple of the other things like avoided signal delay and the toll collection time savings that comes from the all electronic toll collection. I'll come back to those last two in a minute. Those we've decided not to use because we frankly don't need them. And so we can use them as part of our argument for how we're being so conservative. And then the next was to include benefits to the non-revenue traffic. We actually had the port look into how many people from tribal groups and others are going across the bridge without paying tolls now. They get benefits too, even though they're not paying tolls. And so we were able to increase our traffic numbers slightly to reflect those groups. And then the other thing is we did a lot of work on optimizing our safety analysis. I mean, it kind of stands to reason that people taking detours along a 2-lane curvy road in Washington are going to experience more crash exposure. But we wanted to really get in and quantify that by looking at crash rates on each of the different diversion routes. And then the other thing is really the way you do a benefit cost analysis for a bridge replacement project. The biggest source of benefits are going to come from avoided detours when a bridge that needs improvements eventually has to close. And so we've done a lot more, as Carrie said, in just building the case for why our closure scenarios are as reasonable as possible. And then finally, just improving the organization of the model and its transparency and the citations to other data and things like that really helps the DOT reviewers understand how we came up with our number, and always helps with the kind of second half of their rating, which is half of it, or a portion of it is how big is the number, and the other half is how confident are we in the number. A well-organized model gives you that confidence. Next slide, please. So some of the things we've been doing since we talked most recently was we improved how we were describing the baseline versus the additional traffic that we would expect as a result of the improvements. And one of the things is obviously the improved geometry. The wider bridge allows some vehicles to go over it that don't today. And so the traffic and revenue study actually shows a small bump in traffic in 2031 when the new bridge opens, just as a result of trips that, might be going a different way around through the Dalles or something like that, that might be able to use the bridge in the future because it's a slightly shorter route for them and the geometry works for them. One thing to keep in mind is one of the things that sinks a benefit cost analysis is induced traffic. So this is like when you got a 2-lane road and you increase it to 4 lanes, like in a suburban area or something, or you've got a 3-lane interstate and you widen it out to 4 and in each direction. And, as a result, you build that new capacity and it eventually fills up with traffic again. That's induced traffic, and that can actually turn into disbenefits. Part of what we're doing with this project is arguing that we're not going to induce any new traffic because we're not really increasing capacity. It's still a 2-lane bridge. And so that allows us to avoid disbenefits associated with induced traffic while also getting to claim some of the benefits associated with new traffic. Their trips currently being taken, they're just not using this bridge. They're still happening somewhere in the system. All right, another thing that we've done is improve our rationale for the no-build scenario. And Carrie talked about this borrowing versus the pay-as-you-go approach. And Mary Francoeur's team here on the call today did some good work looking at how much what a borrowing scenario would look like, and found that we would need to do a pretty significant toll increase just to cover the finance costs of borrowing that money sometime in the late 2020s to finance that capital improvement program. And so that looks like, not a very marketable security without an unreasonable toll increase. And then we looked at an option of, well, okay, what if we decide in 2026 or so, the feds tell us, no, we're not getting any funding. And now we need to take all the money we have, including all of the reserves that the port has built up, and start throwing that at the capital improvement program needed to keep the bridge open. And what I'll show you in a minute is that doesn't work either. And then finally, or next, we also, one of our largest benefits is actually coming from health benefits associated with avoided detours. So this is when somebody on the Washington side has a heart attack or an unintended injury and needs to get to medical care quickly. And we looked at the capabilities of the medical facilities on both sides of the river and determined that the most likely thing for somebody to do on the Washington side is probably go to the Dalles, which is about 20 miles out of the way compared to just going to Hood River. And that turns into actually a good fraction of an avoided fatality every year of people just having that closer access to medical care. It's something we talk about in the narrative, but we've got a good defensible way to quantify that now. And then finally, the traffic and revenue study gave us forecasts of future traffic. revenues, operating costs, which they've more or less worked with us on, as well as rehab and repair costs for the existing bridge as well as the future bridge. And so we've got everything harmonized with an appendix in their report. And so everything that you see in the benefit cost analysis lines up exactly with the numbers in that report. And it didn't really help us or hurt us all that much, but it does improve that confidence rating they have, is that they know that the numbers we're using in our benefit cost analysis is based on the best traffic study available to date for the project. And all of this allowed us to do what I like to do near the end of one of these processes, is take a look at our number and look at places where we could say, we are not including this as a way of being conservative. What we really want to do is leave our reviewers with the impression that our benefit cost ratio would be a lot higher if we weren't being so conservative. And so these are areas where we give back a couple of hundredths of a point here and there, but we get to say we're being a lot more conservative. And it's as much of an innuendo thing as actual deduction, but it does help, I think, with the final review. So let's go to the next slide.
This is Kerry. I'm going to ask.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you to move along here and maybe maybe go straight to your last slide. And,
all right.
And give these guys the punchline, because I know they're going to want to see that.
Okay.
Let me know when I'm there.
One more. There we go. All right. So we were at a 1.05 last year. We are sitting at about a 2.5 now. We got a couple of things that we're doing. Actually, we're doing them earlier today. Adjusting the cost to better reflect the schedule of the project and things like that. So this 2.59 may be more like a 2.5 before we're done, but we are in a very good place. Our medical benefits are the largest single benefit. After that is time savings associated with those avoided detours. There's a lot of crashes that are avoided with those detours. There's also a lot of fuel and vehicle operating costs that is avoided with those detours. And then we've got a bunch of benefits as well associated with things like avoided operating costs with the electronic toll collection system and just the ongoing maintenance of the bridge. And then a little bit of benefits that we adopted from last year associated with the barge operations and barge strike cost savings, as well as some new bike ped benefits associated with just having the trail on the bridge. So all of this together gives us, I think, a very strong path to a high rating on our benefit cost analysis. There should not be much question about our traffic numbers, because that's coming from the best study anybody could have at this point. And we've been able to tie everything right back to those numbers. So like to open it up for any questions.
So this is Mike. Hey, this is a very nice surprise. The last time I saw this, you're at a BC ratio of 1.5916, something like this. If I remember right, last year we went in with something like before they adjusted it, it was like.
We're at 1.03, I think, last time going in.
And then they adjusted it down to lower than 1.
0.3 at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
in fact, that's, I think, what we ended up with was 0.3.
Yeah, and it just blew us out of the water. We were done. Anything over 1.5, I've been told, is outstanding. So at 2.5, 2.59, we ought to be getting a check.
Well, commissioners, I told you in the past, I like to go in somewhere between 1.8 and 3. And this is perfect. So like I said, we're going to keep fiddling with the number a little bit over the next week or two, but you're going to be roughly in this range based on our work to date.
Sir, in the last presentation, they said they were gonna be leaving off the innovation cost of the travel time and the tolling. So is that counted in our BC ratio? Did you guys remember just hearing that in the last presentation? They were leaving some things off to make sure they touched on it for the innovation part. Is that a different presentation, or was that the same thing?
Yeah, that doesn't affect this number. It'll affect how we talk about innovation, I think, in the narrative part of the application.
Yeah, there are two parts of the application. There's a quantitative part, there's a narrative part. We are going to talk about those things qualitatively in the narrative. But in terms of, as Chris said, one of the things you want to do is, and it has surprised me the extent to which the federal government, they've got people who are almost as smart as Chris and his crew, who go into these spreadsheets and they start picking apart your assumptions. And so what Chris is doing is making a value judgment. If there's an assumption we make that's a bit of a stretch and it doesn't influence that ratio very much, he's going to leave it off to the side. We mention it in the narrative, but we don't include it in the quantitative analysis. And what that does is it demonstrates that we're actually giving them a conservative assessment, which tends to help you. Give them less of a target to pick at.
Okay, so Carrie, give us a quick where we are today going forward. We're going to do an independent review of this. Just lay that out.
So all of this comes together in the next week. Hopefully by the end of next week, we have a 85 or 90% draft document fully assembled. And as I mentioned, Ready is kind of pulling from 6 or 7 people who are preparing different parts of this thing, pulling it together. We're going to work with our graphics and marketing people to make it look pretty and presentable, make sure it flows nicely, make sure we meet all of these sections in the report have page limits. And so we've got to make sure we're being concise where necessary, saying everything we need to say in as few words as possible. We're going to put some graphics in there. If we can show something in a half-page graphic that would take us 2 pages of text to describe, that's probably better. And we've got people obviously working on that. Sometime in, towards the end of that first week of August, then we hope to have a draft ready for your review. And at the same time, we're going to have Robert Mariner, who is a independent reviewer, he was formerly the guy that would approve these things at the U.S. Department of Transportation. And the Port of Hood River is going to contract with him to do an independent expert review. And then we've given ourselves 3 or 4 days cushion after all the reviews come in to incorporate and recover from any comments that we receive. And then our goal is to submit this thing. It's due on August 21st, which is a Monday, I believe. We want to submit this thing on the Friday before, just to completely rule out technical glitches or whatever, because this is an electronic submittal.
So Chris, if I'm understanding this correctly, it seems like all of these numbers would be extremely sensitive to the underlying bridge closure date. Could you speak to that? Was there a slide that maybe we passed over on that subject?
Yeah,
how
actually,
conservative are we being?
Roll it back maybe 2 slides. Yeah, this one here. Well, this is kind of why we have to do it. So this is the PAYGO scenario where basically the blue line reflects what the HDR analysis suggests we need to spend on the bridge after, through the 2030s in order to maintain an adequate state of good repair. We looked at the cash flow situation of what the toll increase, and actually we're even more aggressive. We assumed that the tolls would continue to rise at the same rate as they would with the new bridge in place. And that just doesn't generate enough cash to, without borrowing, allow us to do that capital program. And so what happens every year is there is a certain amount, or periodically in years where you have to spend a fair amount of money, there's just not enough cash to do it. And you have an unmet repair need. And what we found is that a bunch of that unmet repair need happens in the early 2030s, but then it continues through the 2030s. And so what we're thinking is a likely scenario is that we would close the bridge to trucks in 2030, which doesn't really change much in terms of benefits. It's only 2% of traffic, but then it closes to all traffic by 2040. So that's a year after that big chunk of unmet repair needs in 2037 and 38 happened. Is it, whoever's in charge of the authority at that point says, look, we just have to close this thing. And that's what we're assuming. So after 2040, we start getting some significant detour benefits that really help us out. And the next slide shows how those detours look. One of the ways we're being conservative is by only detouring traffic that has trips that begin and end right in the Hood River area on either side, or White Salmon. And so that's only about 38% of the trips, within kind of the larger area. And so they're the only ones that really experience those detour benefits. The yellow is the rerouted traffic. So these are people coming from further away that simply not that big a deal to go upstream or downstream 20 miles. They just continue on their trip and kind of go around the area. But that blue traffic is what we're really getting our benefits from.
I just want to make sure, so you're comfortable that this will be viewed as a conservative assumption by them there? Because basically, if you pick at this thread and say, oh no, you could make this bridge last until 2070, 2080 easily, then I suspect that all these numbers fall apart. I have no trouble accepting this, but I want to make sure, you guys are the experts. I want to make sure that these numbers, that you're quite comfortable that these are defensible.
Yeah, the way we've been trying to do this, and this is going to appear in the narrative as well as the benefit cost analysis memorandum, is we know that we need to spend over $100 million on this bridge to keep it, going. There's no reason that if we spent $100 million, we couldn't get until at least the early 2050s before something big happens. Of course, there's this ever-present, risk of an earthquake or something like that would, mean that the existing structure just can't continue to be in service. But with that, we have no path to get to the 2050s because we can't borrow and we can't generate enough cash to actually make that $100 million of investment. And so therefore, because we can't do that, we don't have a path to 2050s. We're going to have to close it in early 2040s.
Another important thing to remember is that any no build scenario that keeps the bridge going a little bit longer does not address any of the inherent, what do we want to call them, the functional deficiencies of the bridge, the lane widths, the steel grate, and those things. And so there's some benefit there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's close this off. One last thing though, that I believe this is our major chance of getting major funding this year. It's my understanding if we don't get it this year, they're not going to really have this program next year because it's an election year. So we get pushed into 25. 25 is too late. We're not going to make our 2029 opening date. That's going to have to move out if we don't get it this year. So, I applaud the guys and the gals that have worked on this application. I think it's so far hugely different from the previous one. I think with everything else that we've been doing, we're positioned really well. But I think we got to talk just for a minute. I think we've got to crank up our communication program in support of this application greatly. So what I would like to see, and quickly, is a plan put together that when this application hits DC, we've got a program in place where we can get the local residents on both sides of the river starting to flood congressional delegations and flood the Department of Transportation with how important this bridge is to us locally. And I think I've said it before, this is our year. So we ought to be pulling off all of the stops and just hitting it really hard this year. Go ahead.
I think that this might be, I completely agree with what you said. I think people may not understand if they don't have the context. You're not talking about public relations in support of the cost benefit analysis. No. You're talking about in support of the underlying grant that the cost benefit analysis serves. Thanks.
Yeah.
care for cost benefit analysis.
No.
The people showing up is gonna help.
No, yeah, we just need them to really support us with our grant application of 200 million. Go ahead, Kerry.
I will just close at this point. The one thing I want to mention is that we are also planning, and this is strategy that was actually suggested to us by DOT, and we've vetted it, and it's in fact sound advice, and that is we are applying for $200 million under the MPDG program. We are also going to apply for the same $200 million under the Bridge Investment Program. And we have put language in our narrative telling them we're doing that. And what that does is it gives the federal government a lot more flexibility in determining how to fund this thing. They can use one grant or the other, or a combination of the two, to fully fund us through the 7-year funding cycles that we're looking at. So I think that will be that'll be very well received. The beauty of this is that the cost benefit analysis is exactly the same for both of those programs. And so we don't have to redo this entire process.
Hey, this is Marla. I wanted to fact check one thing. Next year is a funding year for these programs that were passed under infra. Isn't that right?
Yes. And so what's going to happen is they're going to make both this year's funding and next year's funding available this year. So if they were to award, and I suspect this might happen, if they were to award all of next year's money as part of this year's program, there won't be anything left to award next year. Now, to the extent that there's money left over, and this could happen as well, there would be a funding cycle next year for whatever's left. But it is to our tremendous benefit to lay claim to as much of this as we can in this funding cycle.
No, absolutely. I just don't want to get a perception that we're driving out there into the community that's false, that this is the last year. These next two funding cycles are very critical, but the way that it was passed and the way that it is funded is to fund into next year, potentially as an application window as well.
Yeah, Marla, I would just offer up kind of on a graded scale. If they combine the years 23 and 24 in 23 to make the awards, I'm guessing 90% of that combined set of numbers will get awarded this year. And whatever's left over goes into next year that we could try for a second bite at the apple. With that said, realistically, that number is going to be pretty small, and the number of people going after it's going to be very large. So that's why I say this is our year to really hit it hard. Not to say that we're going to give up if we don't get anything. We'll try it again next year, but our likelihood of getting anything is much better this year and of magnitude that we need.
No, I completely agree. Don't misunderstand me, but I think it's important too, as we're functioning as a true authority, that we don't put things out there that could get misconstrued. And what we know to be true is that this program is fully funded through multiple funding cycles, and next year is one. We do not know what they'll do with it, but it doesn't diminish how important this year is for us. I agree with everything said about developing a good outreach and communication strategy. I just get nervous about us as leadership throwing statements out there that we can't really back up. And we do not know, we cannot predict what would happen in 2024 with the amount that's allocated and what staff is deciding to do at those highest levels with these awards.
Totally agree with you, Marla. I think we need a communication program put together to sell how we want to sell this year, whatever that is. But yeah. Okay, other comments on this one? We are quickly running out of time, so if we could bring up the agenda. I'm going to suggest we move a few things. Okay, if you can blow that up a bit too, so we can read it. So if you go down to item number 7, 7A is what we've just talked about. I'm going to suggest that 7B, the funding report dashboards, we push that to the next meeting because we're physically out of time now. Upcoming presentations. This is just a heads up, what's coming at us the next couple of meetings. And we keep that on the list. Unfinished business, if we could get a very brief status of where are we on payment options available through the Bridge Commission.
Hi, yes, this is Debbie, in case people don't know. When we had some issues reviewing the Zoom video from last time because you couldn't see everybody. So this is Debbie. I went through, you don't have a lot of options because I ruled out things like bake sales and things like that. So basically right now there's grants. And so and obviously that's the majority of your funding and always will be for the life of this project anyway. So for things that are reimbursable, they can be charged to grants. That part is easy. It's when we get to the stuff that's non-reimbursable by grants. And so you're going to have one additional revenue source, which is toll. So the toll increase that the port approved at their last meeting, which goes into effect on September 1st that we've been talking about. All of that increase amount is dedicated towards this project. And so there was concern, though, by the Port Commission that they want all of that money to go towards the project and not to be a source of operation for non-reimbursable items. And so there's additional discussion at the port level about giving you basically a zero interest loan until, and they threw this out, but this is not written in stone. They're still kind of bandying about how it would work. And obviously it would be potentially a negotiation between you and them. But what they kind of threw out there was the idea that when your reserves hit $20 million and or you open the new bridge and you're getting tolls, then you would start paying this loan back. So it'd be a no interest loan. So it's a great deal. I'd love to have an offer like that. So it's a great deal. And it kind of helps with that idea of how you're going to fund your non-reimbursable items. I did also put in there in the memo that was just handed out that the port is actually paying for some of your non-reimbursable stuff for at least for this next fiscal year. We did put in the budget the lobbying expenses because those are not refundable or not reimbursable by grants. And so the port did commit to paying the lobbying expenses for the fiscal year that we're in right now. So the fiscal year that ends on June 30th of 2024. So it's kind of a to be continued kind of discussion, I believe, because the port at this point is starting to put together a loan agreement that then they would offer up to you. You're also a bit restricted because you don't have an attorney on board yet. And so that request for qualifications is out there. And I haven't heard back from anybody, but I'm going to prod them next week to say, hey, unfortunately, there's not a lot of firms out there doing this service anymore. The vast majority of cities that I started talking to that used to contract this out is actually hired staff away from those firms that used to do this kind of work. And so, but I'm going to keep pushing and get some results back, I believe. But so yeah, you're kind of waiting for an attorney at this point to review anything that the port comes up with anyway.
Is there comments from anybody? Go ahead.
So I agree with what several of the port commissioners said. We've told the public that the tolls were to be used for building reserve. And I know Commissioner Anderson reiterated that, I think, last meeting. So that to me says that we should be very thankful for the offer of the loan and not be using the monies that are committed to build reserve for operations.
Other comments from anybody? I would just say personally, I think it's really nice of the port to do this for us. They didn't have to do it. An interest-free loan, and I kind of like the idea. We said we needed 15 for the TIFIA loan, 21 for operations by the time the new bridge opens up. Once we get to 20, and if we're really growing that fund faster than what we thought we were going to, I think it's great that we start paying back the loan, if not in total. I think we got some homework to do ourselves. We need to develop an operational budget for the new bridge and what we're gonna need in the next several years ourselves, that we don't want to be taking out of grants or can't be taking out of grants. So I would offer up that one would be, that one would be a really good one for our finance team to start generating, you know, when we get them organized, and then bring it back to us to ratify and whatnot. Other comments? Well, please tell the port, thank you very much, and one of us will also say that, but appreciate it. I'm going to suggest as we go down, new business action items. Number one, I'm going to say, let's postpone that one to the next time. Public records policy and forms, I would say, let's do that the next time. PO box, that one could be pretty quick. Mike?
Yeah, it's just the first step, so that
Yep.
was PO box. Just, the motion is for a motion to approve staff to, set up a PO box. If there's a discussion on the location, that would be the only discussion.
Does anybody have a strong opinion? Should it be in White Salmon or Benton or Hood River?
I think it should be in a post office. They're federal property.
Thanks for that significant
They are
comment.
federal property. I don't think it matters.
Okay, then if I'm gonna offer up, let's just put it in Hood River. Do we have any objection to that? If we really have to, we can move it later. Okay. Yeah, could we have a motion that it's okay to? I'm sorry.
Yeah. I move we approve.
So
staff
moved.
PO box.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, 3. Marla, you okay?
Yes.
Okay, and Jake, you okay? Well, we got a quorum anyway. Okay. it passed.
Aye.
Oh, good. Okay. So that one's behind us. The next one, which is interim governance and communication committee leads. I'm going to suggest the interim governance we hold for a minute. Communication committee leads. Does anybody, go ahead.
I thought that we have recommendation for these 5 committees. I'm going to suggest that 3 committees makes a lot more sense, but we haven't had that discussion yet. This seems to be presuming that we have 5 committees.
Okay. So let's postpone this for one more meeting and then we'll come back on it.
Yep.
For both intern governance and the communications. The progressive design build team, the construction engineering team. I think we need to at least start that team quickly, because that team should be part of the review of the RFP package, which is coming at us here fairly quickly if we want to be able to mitigate or change anything in it. So I'm going to offer up, I would like to be on that committee. I've talked to Doug, called me, and he would like to be on that committee. And who else would, do you have any desires? Okay. Okay. And it's going to take me a bit. Your name, first name? Eric. Got it. Hey, anybody else want to be on it? Okay,
Will
So-
ODOT be helping us this time?
I'm sorry.
Will ODOT be helping us this time?
Absolutely. So the evaluation team is supposed to be 5. We'll have 3 from our board. And then we'll have an ODOT and a WashDOT. Okay, now that doesn't mean to say that we can't have more than that, not necessarily on the official evaluation team, but the team that's reviewing the RFP, we can have as many as we want, and that's where it's really important to influence what we're going after. So you want to be on the team? Okay, Catherine. Okay, down to,
Sorry, Mike, for those on the phone, can you just audibly say who in the room volunteered to be on that?
yeah, so it's going to be Fox, Doug Gibson. Let's see, who else we got? Yeah,
Eric.
I'm looking for Eric. Oh, Eric Wilson and Catherine Thomas will be not on the evaluation board, but will be on the RFQ review team.
Okay, and so I know we're pausing on the other 2 committees or that further discussion, so I just also wanted to be clear. This is specific right now
Yes.
to the task at hand, but is not implying that this is the group that will be the engineering and construction committee, because we're yet to commit to how many committees we need.
Correct. This gets
Okay.
us through the RFQ and the award of the contract.
I move for the people mentioned to be on that team. I move for the people that you named to be on that team.
I will second.
Could we have a vote? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Jake,
Aye.
good deal. Okay. Thank you for that. Legal counsel, we've already talked about, so we don't need to go through that. Informational items. And I'm sorry.
So on the legal counsel, there's a couple things that you need to do. One is you need to set up a schedule for once you get the RFPs and we have the evaluation team. They need to get together and set up a process to bring back to the board. The motion is for that group to get together and come back to the board with a recommended schedule and approach to the selection.
And we would suggest that you come back to the board at the next meeting, because we need a quick turnaround on this. Next meeting is the 14th. Okay,
I move that group to get together post haste.
second, anyone? Okay, it's been seconded by Arthur with a request for Mike Shannon to provide written direction. All in favor? Aye. How about Marla
Aye.
and Jake? He's fishing. Okay, we have enough for a positive vote there. Informational items. I think we can hold on this until next meeting. Is there any that? Yeah. Let's hold because we're already over. Upcoming actions, items, you can take a look at this. Community events down in item number 11. Just heads up, August 1st, White Salmon Fisherman's Market or Farmers Market, excuse me. Do we need, Jessica, do we need reps to help out?
Love to have at least one commissioner available at each of the events, just because this is a really great opportunity to introduce yourself. So we can follow up separately with these dates and see when people are available. I'll just add that I heard you loud and clear about how we need to start gathering stories about the significance of the bridge from the community. And those community events are another really good opportunity for us to like grab those stories. So it's just another really, it can serve many purposes.
Okay, so I would suggest whoever would like to be involved in the August 1st date get your name over to Mike and Mike Shannon and he'll pass it on to you. Okay, next meeting is August the 14th, 2 to 4, right here. Is there any other items that we need to discuss?
Really simple. I would like to request that for the next meeting, we have name tags, at a minimum, just a piece of paper and a marker. I'm happy to write my name myself, but the public needs to know who we are. We have to know who each other are. So thank you.
Yeah, especially old guys like me that
I run meetings. I know how hard.
I need my own nameplate.
So you want a two-sided name tag?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other items for tonight? With that, can we adjourn? Okay, we're going to adjourn. Thank you.